Mr. President, it has been more than 6 months since Hamas committed heinous acts of evil against innocent civilians. It was the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Tragically, the attack included the murder and kidnapping of U.S. citizens. For the hostages still being held in Gaza, the terror continues. The hostages are being deprived of food, of water, of medicine. They're being subjected to unbearable violence, abuse, and torture by Hamas terrorists. Think about the pain, the uncertainty, and the fear that has gripped the families day after day for more than 180 days. This is personal for Americans, but it is particularly important to those of us in North Carolina. One of our fellow citizens is among those still being held, Keith Siegel. Seeking the release of hostages, it demands strength, it demands moral clarity. We demand it from our own leaders, and we should require it from our major allies. I believe it's time for our nation to re-examine who we can count on to be on our side and who stands on the side of the terrorists. The state of Qatar, for example, hosts Hamas leaders in the capital of Doha. Now, initially, Qatari officials claimed that they were exercising leverage on Hamas. They publicly stated thereafter that they don't have any leverage. And now they're promoting a ceasefire regardless of the release of the hostages. After 6 months, the patience of the United States has run out. The truth is that Qatar does have significant leverage over Hamas. They have the ability to expel these terrorists if they don't release the hostages or at least engage in reasonable negotiations. In fact, last month, a bipartisan group of senators stated clearly that, quote, if Hamas refuses reasonable negotiations, there is no reason for Qatar to continue hosting Hamas's political office or any of its members in Doha. After multiple more than fair offers from Israel, Hamas has refused to accept any deal or even show flexibility on terms. The truth is that Hamas is not interested in releasing the hostages, and Qatar seems equally uninterested in forcing them to do so. It's time that we hold nations like Qatar accountable for their dithering and for their stalling. Since 2022, Qatar has enjoyed major non-NATO ally status. This designation is a privilege that nations like Qatar must continuously earn. Failure to take action against Hamas is beginning to look like tacit support for a foreign terrorist organization designated by the United States. This is not acceptable behavior for a major non-NATO ally. That's why I introduced a bill this week to require the Secretary of State to formally certify 4 things. 1, whether it is in the national interest of the United States for Qatar to maintain its designation as a major non-NATO ally. 2, whether Qatar has exerted any and all leverage it has over Hamas to secure the release of the United States hostages from Gaza. 3, that Qatar does not directly or indirectly support, financially or otherwise, acts of international terrorism or foreign terrorist organizations, including Hamas. And 4, that Qatar has expelled or agreed to extradite to the United States any individuals bearing responsibility for the terror attack on October 7, 2023. If the Secretary of State cannot make this certification in good faith, then the President is required to immediately terminate the designation of the state of Qatar as a major non-NATO ally. I don't introduce this bill lightly. It's not where I started with this relationship, but it is a reflection of where we are today as a result of the repeated warnings that members of Congress have given to Qatar about the liability of continuing to host Hamas. Since October 7, I have engaged privately and publicly with Qatar. At times, I've even thanked them, including for the November hostage deal, which included the release of some U.S. citizens. But I've also been clear about expectations for Qatar's relationship with Hamas in mediation of the hostage crisis moving forward. You see, the United States expects its allies to use all leverage and exert all possible pressure to secure the release of our citizens when they're taken hostage. At the beginning of this year, I told the Qataris that time is up and the United States will be watching. It's now long past time, and we've been watching closely. The time for talking is over, and the time for action is now. If we don't see action, then Qatar must face consequences. At the end of the day, the bill represents another step towards securing the freedom of our fellow Americans. It's my sincere hope that this chamber can speak with one voice in solidarity and assure that these families, that we are indeed doing everything to bring their loved ones home.